Hi, I'm John Newbery. I'm Fishing World's Environment Editor, and I'm down here this morning at one of my favourite blackfish fishing spots to try and get some fish. Conditions look pretty good. There's a nice wash. The tide's rising, so I'm going to fish for an hour or two. I've got my safety rock fishing shoes on, and I'm about to pick some bait so that I can start the session. One of the nice things about blackfish fishing is your bait's free, and if you come to the right spot, you're able to just collect it and use it on the spot. That'll certainly be enough to start with, and as you can see, it's easy to get, and I'll be able to replenish as necessary. You just keep it in a bait bucket on your belt. Blackfish hooks are small. They can be one of several patterns. This one's an O'Shaughnessy, but you could equally well use a sneck or a double-strength suicide or any of the chemically sharpened panfish hooks. And you just attach it to your light leader, in this case 3 kilo fluorocarbon, just a 4-wrap uni knot. In the old days, flatted hooks were very popular, so hooks with just a spade eye instead of a ring, and you had to snell those on, which is a different knot again. They're not as popular as they were, and you don't see that many of them, but some of the old style blackfish fishermen still prefer them to ringed hooks because they say they sit better in the bait and look more natural. I'll just show you how to put a cabbage bait on, because the popular blackfish baits are either sea cabbage, which we're using today, or weed, but for this session I'm going to start with a cabbage bait. And the trick to doing that is to select a longish section of the sea cabbage and then to not twist it onto the hook, but actually lace it on as if you were sewing. So you flatten the cabbage out like that, and then you lace it onto the hook like that. When I say lace it, you put it through as if almost you're putting on a fillet bait. Put it through about 3 times so that it lays nice and flat and will look natural to the blackfish. And then up the line a few centimetres, you do a half hitch, and you hitch the line around the top of the bait, and then you end up with a nice flat natural looking piece of cabbage that hopefully a blackfish is going to find irresistible. The first lot of bait that I collected is what we call sea lettuce or sea cabbage, but the first couple of drifts that I had out with it, the fish took the bait reasonably easily. So I decided to try instead some green weed, which is the other main sort of blackfish bait that we use. The green weed always works best in harbour environments, but sometimes on the rocks it can be equally successful. And you put that on slightly differently. You actually tease it out into a longish piece, and then you plait it around the hook. You twist it one way for about 4 turns, and then you take it up the line and twist it in the opposite direction for 2 or 3 turns until it looks fairly natural and covers the hook. And again, you put that half hitch around the top of the bait. You end up with a long bait of weed that the hook's completely disguised within. And that's what I just caught that fish on, and I'm just going to try and get another one now.
Okay, John, we've been out on the water and already caught a few blackfish this morning. For someone like me who hasn't done a lot of this sort of fishing, what sort of gear would I need to get into it as far as a rod and a reel goes?
If you want to be a specialist blackfish fisherman, Scott, there's nothing better than an old style centerpin reel. And I say old style because they haven't changed really for 120 years, but nowadays they're making them out of modern salt resistant materials. And something like this that's made out of aircraft grade aluminium will withstand the salt and be terrific. This one's got ball races in it, and the thing that you have to do when you start fishing with this sort of reel is learn a casting technique that's straight off the spool. So this reel doesn't turn sideways, it's a direct drive, and what you in fact learn to do is to cast off the spool. There's a couple of different styles, some have ball races and some have what's called a centerpin. But they all work much the same, and for the ardent blackfish fishermen they're the best choice. Although you will see guys using threadline reels as well.
And what sort of advantage would a reel like this have over, say, a threadline reel?
The main advantage, Scott, is that you have ultimate control because you're using your hand to break the reel as it turns, and you're fishing very light leaders and lines. You can control a fish's movement. And blackfish can be quite strong and they're quite capable of breaking 3 kilo line. And with threadline reels, it's hard to get that control. In a rocky area like the one we're fishing here, sometimes you'll have to steer a fish away from a Cunjivoy reef or a barnacle encrusted rock or whatever. And this really is the sort of reel that'll give you that best control. When you master the casting technique too, they're really, really accurate. So you can cast the way a fly fisherman does, right on the spot you want your float and rig to land.
Okay. And what about the rod? This is obviously a specialist blackfish rod. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, if you're going to get into blackfish fishing on a regular basis, it's worth investing in a good blackfish rod. They have, as you can see, a medium length butt, so you can tuck it up under your arm while you're fishing. And they have a slow taper with a good large number of runners on the rod itself. Yep. So instead of the 5 or 6 runners that you would see on a surf casting rod or a beach rod, a rod like this would have 8 or 9 runners to allow the line to follow the curve of the blank really accurately, a bit like a fly rod, actually. They're usually a slowish taper, and they're generally between about, in the old measure, 10'6" and say 13'6" long. And you'd find most keen blackfish fishermen would have a slightly heavier version of a rod like this one here, which is 11'4". And for working up harbours and rivers where the fish are a bit smaller, you would have a lighter rod, might be 10'6". You'd use the same reel on it, but it would be lighter in weight and a little bit more flexible. But on the ocean rocks you need something with a little bit of power to steer the fish up over the rock ledges.
I've also noticed, John, the line you're using here is a lot different than what most people would use on their spin reels or baitcaster reels for lure casting. So is that a specialist line for this? It
is a special line. You'll notice that it's quite a bright colour. It's a fluoro orange, this one, but you can get them in fluoro yellows and fluoro greens as well. They're what's called a float line, made by Japanese companies. There's a couple of well-known brands that put them out, and they actually float on the surface of the water. Because you're drifting a float out over a longish distance and then you're striking, you need a line that will lie on the surface rather than sink. And these are a type of monofilament. They're not braid, but for some reason they're engineered in such a way that they will float on the surface. For rock work, I like to go up again in non-metric measure to about 12 pounds to get the right diameter, so that you're not nicking it on the rocks and losing rigs. And 12 pound is a good all-round weight to put on a centerpin reel to fish off the rocks. If you were setting up a reel specifically for fishing in a lake, you might go a bit lighter, you might go 10 or 8 pound, but the 12 will work fine anyway. Attached to that though, you have a clear leader, usually a fluorocarbon leader, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about rigging up.
Yeah, okay. John, I've noticed this interesting looking net down here. When would you use that to when you're catching blackfish?
Basically, you wouldn't use a landing net all that often on the ocean rocks because you're relying on the wave to wash the fish out. But at a spot like this, at low tide, when the water drops away, sometimes it's very hard to do that. So we usually carry one of these telescopic landing nets with us when we fish a spot like this. This one actually extends out to about 5 metres in length, and it enables you to net your fish without having to hang around for ages hoping for a wave to wash it out. You'd also always carry a landing net if you were blackfish fishing on a wharf or somewhere where you're in a situation where there's no capacity to wash the fish out. Because you're using very light leaders and very small hooks, if you try and lift the fish straight out of the water onto a wharf or a rock platform, you really have a high chance of either breaking the fine leader or the hook actually pulling out of the fish because it's a very small hook. So a landing net always, if you're going to fish in a harbour off a wharf, and sometimes when you're fishing on the rocks, particularly if it's low tide and the sea's a bit flat and you just can't wash the fish out.